Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain an American psychological thriller film from 2018, titled Unsane. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. The movie begins with David Strine expressing to a woman that he loves how she looks in blue because she was wearing that color when they first met. Now, he wants to recapture the same feelings he had when they first encountered each other. Next, we meet Sawyer Valentini, who works as a salesperson over the phone in Pennsylvania. She becomes frightened when she thinks she sees David entering her workplace. Sawyer lives alone and has a friend at work, named Jill. Additionally, she frequently talks to her mother, Angela, who resides in Boston. The following day, Sawyer goes on a Tinder date with Mike, and she openly tells him that he'll get what he wants, but after that, she doesn't want any further contact. They go to her apartment where they start making out, but Sawyer has a panic attack and locks herself in the bathroom, and the confused Mike leaves. Alone in her bedroom, Sawyer searches for support groups for stalking victims on her laptop and finds a helpful center. The following morning, Sawyer visits a counselor at a facility called Highland Creek to discuss her issues. She reveals that she was stalked by David for 2 years, which left her mentally unwell with occasional suicidal thoughts. The counselor recommends extra counseling sessions for Sawyer to have someone to talk to about her problems. Sawyer fills out paperwork provided by the counselor without fully reading it, and after completing the paperwork, Sawyer is escorted to a room by a coworker named Dennis. Following the facility protocol, Sawyer has her belongings taken away and she meets Nurse Bolus, who instructs her to undress down to her underwear and remove all jewelry for a physical examination to check for scars, birthmarks, and moles as per facility policy. Confused and reluctant, Sawyer tries to leave but finds the door locked, and eventually, she complies with Nurse Bolus' instructions and undergoes the examinations. After this, Sawyer is given different clothes and medication to help her feel better. Nurse Bolus then escorts her to another room where she encounters other patients, and realizes she has been involuntarily committed for the next 24 hours. Sawyer approaches Nurse Bolus, expressing appreciation for her professionalism and consideration for her well-being. She insists on making a phone call to her family to reassure them she's okay, and Bolus agrees. However, instead of calling her family, Sawyer contacts the police and explains her situation. Upon learning this, Nurse Bolus informs her that the police frequently receive calls like hers and instructs her to return to the ward. In the ward, Sawyer, feeling irritated about thing that just happened, is approached by another patient named Violet. Violet starts pestering Sawyer, and threatens to cut her hair while she sleeps. When Sawyer asks her what she would use, Violet reveals a shiv she made. Before their conversation can continue, another patient named Nate Hoffman intervenes, urging Sawyer to speak kindly to Violet instead of calling her a mental patient, and Sawyer tells him to mind his own business. Sawyer then reveals to everyone that the police are on their way to take her out of there, which causes the other patients to laugh. Meanwhile, 2 police officers arrive at the facility after a 911 call from Sawyer, but they leave after quickly verifying the intake papers presented by the receptionist. Back in the ward, as Sawyer tries to leave the room, a patient named Jacob approaches her. He attempts to touch her, prompting her to knee him in the groin, and then violently hit at the door to get out. When the door opens, Sawyer sees an orderly whom she mistakes for David, so she punches him before being restrained and sedated by Nurse Bolus. The next morning, Sawyer wakes up to find Violet looking at her, relieved to see that her hair is unharmed despite Violet's threats. In the cafeteria, the other patients stare and laugh at Sawyer before she is approached by a nurse who informs her that Dr. Hawthorne wants to see her. In Dr. Hawthorne's office, Sawyer tries to explain that she doesn't belong here and it's a mistake that she's being held against her will, insisting she is mentally stable. However, Dr. Hawthorne informs Sawyer that her admission of being a danger to herself and others necessitates that she remain under observation. Additionally, due to her altercation with Dennis and Jacob, Hawthorne extends Sawyer's commitment period to 7 days before ending the meeting. Later, Nate Hoffman privately tells Sawyer that Highland Creek is engaging in a scheme to exploit health insurance claims for financial gain. They deceive individuals into willingly admitting themselves, ensuring that the patient's insurance providers keep paying. Once the insurance coverage expires, the patient is declared cured and discharged. Nate encourages Sawyer to avoid causing troubles, don't make enemies, and suggests that if she has any questions, she can meet him. During her daily medication routine, Sawyer spots David Strine posing as orderly George Shaw, which greatly unsettles her. She becomes agitated and tries to convince others that David is actually her stalker from Boston. However, David denies any knowledge of her. Despite this, Sawyer continues to see David, but the staff and fellow patients believe her claims are just part of her psychosis, projecting her stalker onto an innocent orderly. This results in Sawyer being taken back to the ward and restrained. Later that night, Sawyer discovers that Nate has been hiding a cell phone and conversing with an unknown person. Nate quickly ends the call upon realizing that Sawyer is aware of his actions. The next morning, while in the cafeteria, Sawyer attempts to approach Nate but is intercepted by Violet, who accuses her of theft and demands her belongings back. This confrontation leads Sawyer to lash out and strike Violet, resulting in her being taken away. In the office, Dr. Hawthorne warns Sawyer of solitary confinement in the basement if she becomes violent towards any more patients. Despite Sawyer's insistence that George Shaw is her stalker David Strine, Hawthorne dismisses her claim and decides to add lithium to her medication regimen to prevent further incidents. During their medication routine, David apologizes to Sawyer for any unintentional offense, and amidst a distraction, he discreetly shows her a piece of mail belonging to Angela. This encounter triggers an outburst from Sawyer, leading to her being sedated and restrained once again. The next day, Sawyer is released and heads to the cafeteria to meet Nate, only to find him absent. She ventures outside and spots Nate texting someone, who quickly hides the phone upon her approach. Sawyer persuades Nate to let her use the phone to contact her mother, promising a favor in return. Nate agrees and hands her the phone, instructing her to return it in 5 minutes. Sawyer calls her mother Angela, who is in Boston, and explains the entire situation, including the facility where she is being held against her will. She reveals to her mother about being stalked while in Boston and explains that the stalker is now at the hospital with her, and after their conversation, Sawyer hands the phone back to Nate. Angela travels all the way from Boston to confront Dr. Hawthorne and Highland's administrator, Ashley Brighterhouse. Miss Brighterhouse insists that their work at Highland is commendable and that Sawyer can leave once she's deemed better. After demanding to see her daughter, Miss Brighterhouse allows it, arranging a visit in the cafeteria in 20 minutes, and they both hug during their meeting. During their conversation, Sawyer apologizes to her mom for not mentioning the stalker until now, but Angela vows to do everything in her power to get her daughter out. Before leaving, Angela reveals she will stay at a nearby motel and mobilize the police and lawyers to come back and take Sawyer out of here. Shortly after, Angela heads to the police station to file a complaint, but the officers explain they can't take action without proof of a crime. On her way to the motel, Angela calls her lawyer, who informs her that there's little he can do within the confines of the law. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, David deliberately adds a large dose of methylphenidate to Sawyer's medication. As she takes it, she begins to behave erratically before being taken away by hospital staff. Shortly after, Nurse Bowles warns David about the need to be more cautious with medications. That evening, Angela, staying at the motel, receives a knock on the door from someone claiming to be a maintenance man, only to discover it's David. The ominous implication of David's presence leaves Angela's fate uncertain. Back at the hospital, Nate approaches Sawyer and tries to comfort her after the psychotic episode she experienced. As they grow closer as friends, Sawyer confides in Nate about how she first encountered David. She explains that she worked in a hospice caring for David's ailing father, who had Alzheimer's disease. After his father passed away, David began to harass her, insisting that his father would have wanted them to be together. David's harassment escalated with countless texts and calls until Sawyer blocked him. He then started sending her flowers at work and even broke into her house to leave a blue dress there. Things became so intense that Sawyer had to obtain a restraining order against David. She also had a security officer install cameras in her building and received guidance on how to ensure David couldn't locate her. After their conversation, they head to take their medication. This time, Sawyer decides not to swallow the pills and discreetly spits them out while lying on her bed, and to her surprise, she discovers her mother's ring under her pillow. Feeling anxious, Sawyer borrows Nate's phone to call her mother, but receives no response. She leaves a voice note before returning the phone to Nate, unaware that David is watching them from a nearby window. The next morning, Sawyer approaches Nate outside and asks if he received a voicemail or text message last night, but Nate says he did not. Meanwhile, David, who has been spying on them during their conversation, feels threatened by Sawyer and Nate being together, prompting him to devise a plan. While Nate is in the bathroom cleaning up after using the toilet, he is suddenly knocked unconscious by David. Nate is then taken to the hospital basement, where he is tied to a chair and tortured with a defibrillator. David ultimately kills Nate by administering an overdose of fentanyl before disposing of his body near the staircase. In the cafeteria, Sawyer gets into another altercation with Violet, leading to both of them being taken back to the ward. While there, Sawyer discovers Nate's phone under her pillow, containing images of Nate badly beaten. She alerts the staff, but they dismiss her concerns, accusing her of smuggling in a phone, which is not allowed. David rushes in and sedates her before she can be placed in solitary confinement. Meanwhile, Nurse Bowles shares the shocking news of Nate's death with David and instructs him not to mention it to any of the patients. Later, David visits Sawyer in solitary confinement, where he is still delusional, believing that Sawyer may still have feelings for him. He offers to take her to a cabin where they can be together, revealing that he has disabled the security cameras. During their conversation, Sawyer confronts David, accusing him of killing Nate. She also berates him, tearing him down for his obsession with her and his failure to find anyone else to pursue, and this drives David to tears. As Sawyer purposefully agitates him, David momentarily puts his hands around her throat in frustration before leaving the room. On the outside, a woman is jogging through the park with her dog when they stumble upon a hand buried in the dirt. Alarmed, she calls the police, and upon investigation, it is later revealed that the victim is the real George Shaw. Back at Highland Asylum, David brings Sawyer food and coffee, and he once again tries to propose the cabin idea to her. When Sawyer asked how will he explain her absence from the ward, David said he has changed her duration of stay at the hospital and the administration will think our insurance is already ran out and she is gone. However, as Sawyer was eating and drinking, the two engaged in a conversation, and Sawyer tells him to get another woman down here and sleep with her to prove his love for her, but David becomes uncomfortable with the idea until Sawyer suggests bringing Violet. He does so and nearly rapes Violet until Sawyer steps in. She pretends to act intimately toward Violet but is really just going for her shiv. Sawyer stabs David in the throat with the shiv and makes her escape, leaving Violet behind, and she watches in horror as the enraged David snaps Violet's neck. Sawyer manages to flee from Highland, and hides behind a tank, but her relief is short-lived as David catches up to her and knocks her out from behind. Sawyer wakes up disoriented in the trunk of David's car and is met with a foul smell, and upon opening a nearby bag, she discovers to her horror that it contains her mother, Angela. Overcome with grief, Sawyer cries for her mother and takes her cross necklace. She manages to escape the trunk, but David stops the car and pursues her into the woods. Meanwhile, the police return to Highland after identifying Shaw's body, and reporters swarm the scene as well. It is revealed that Nate was an inside man for a news team investigating the activities at Highland before his death. Despite this revelation, Brighter House maintains that their practices are ethical. However, the police investigation uncovers sufficient evidence to arrest Brighter House. In the woods, Sawyer stumbles and falls while running, giving David the opportunity to catch up to her. He viciously fractures her leg with a hammer before carrying her further into the woods.
That's for you.
He lays down next to her and tries to talk to her lovingly, but Sawyer turns out to be conscious. She pulls out her mother's necklace and stabs David in the eye before going for the shiv again and slice David's throat, finally killing him. Before the movie concludes, Sawyer is having lunch with Jill, who mentions that Sawyer got a promotion. Sawyer then overhears a man having a conversation with a friend about a woman he loves. She believes it to be David, and she grabs a knife before approaching the man from behind. The man turns around, and Sawyer realizes it's not David. Horrified at what she was about to do, Sawyer runs out of the restaurant, realizing that even though David is dead, she will never be free of his influence. Okay guys, that's all the recap about Unsane from 2018. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.